So, Mr. Dutton, are you concerned that Russia under President Putin is seeking an expanded military presence in the region?
Well, Paul, I think any person wanting to lead this country would have to be deeply concerned about that development. And it's been the case for a period of time. I'm sure that the Australian government's been monitoring this situation because the relationship between Indonesia and Russia and China obviously has been well known, and I haven't heard the Prime Minister say anything about it, but I think there is surely a significant concern within the government, and most security analysts would express concern about any strengthening of relationships or ties or links to or presence of Russia in the Indo-Pacific.
I mean, as you know, Australia is close to Indonesia in both an intelligence and a political sense. To what extent are you concerned that the Labor government seems not very well informed about what's happened?
Well, Paul, I just find it startling that we can have Chinese naval ships circumnavigate our country and we don't have a true intelligence picture until a Virgin pilot reports it to the government. The Prime Minister can't work out whether it was the Australian Border Force or the Australian Defence Force monitoring the movements of a naval warship. And then we have an instance where the government finds out about the tariffs out of the United States by watching Sky News, and they don't have any forewarning. And this is the latest troubling example where surely the government must have known that some approach had been made, or that there was a suggestion that approach had been made by the Russians to the Indonesians. Obviously the Indonesians have been sympathetic to the discussions with the Russians, have entered into arrangements with the BRIC Pact, and I find it really difficult to comprehend that the Prime Minister of our country wouldn't have known about it, but he seemed quite taken by surprise when first asked about it. And as I say, it's the latest in a series of really troubling suggestions that the Prime Minister has no interest in foreign affairs or no interest in national security matters.
So how do you think Australia should respond to this situation and what seems to be the growing dialogue and relationship between Indonesia and Russia?
I think we have to insert ourselves further into the relationship with Indonesia. We need to identify the countries within the region who have significant concern as well, and as we've done with AUKUS, as we've done with the Quad, bringing like-minded countries together to speak in a unified way, I think is much more impactful. But the Prime Minister should be on the phone to the President. I don't know when the last time might be that he spoke with him, but it shows a lack of engagement, and it shows just a lack of interest and experience. The Prime Minister, for all of his years in Parliament, has never held a national security portfolio, never held an economic portfolio, and never held a portfolio where he would have had significant engagement with partners, including Indonesia. So I think the fact that not one single minister, it seems, has a relationship with anyone in the US administration, nobody in the Indonesian administration, the Foreign Affairs Minister didn't have a phone call or wasn't advised or had no intelligence, or they're simply not providing the advice. So we requested a briefing more than 24 hours ago, and the government's delayed that briefing for some reason, which again I think should cause us concern, and it raises questions as to why the government won't be honest and frank with the Australian people.
You mentioned the Chinese circumnavigation of Australia, the live firing exercise and the Virgin pilot's warning. How would you have reacted had you been Prime Minister to that same situation?
Well, Dennis, I think we demonstrated when we were in government that we had a relationship that gave rise to an engagement before the ships came into our region, and that was a planned process. So firstly, I have no doubt in my mind that we would be able to open up those lines of communication so that we can have forewarning. Next point is that Australia needs to stand up for our values. And more than ever, we need to be with like-minded countries to stare down authoritarian regimes, to stare down the concern that the Prime Minister talks about this being the most precarious period since 1945, and then puts a full stop behind it, never talks about what it is he's referring to. And surely the prospect of Russia having a base or being permanently present in our region, that must be what the Prime Minister is speaking about. But again, not a word has been uttered by the Prime Minister, and he's either not comfortable in the space, doesn't want to raise it as an issue because he knows that the Australian people believe that it's a weakness of the Albanese government. And I think we're seen as weak on the international stage. So projecting our values, what's important to us, and maintaining a significant presence in areas of concern, that has to be the initial approach. And I just think the government has dropped the ball in relation to national security. It would be the most polite way that I could put it.
How do you think the public reacted, first of all, to the Chinese circumnavigation, the Chinese spy ship, and now the Russian proposal for a base only 1,300 kilometres from Darwin? How do you think the people are responding?
I think people are frankly jolted, and I think they're looking at the flux and the uncertainty that's in the world at the moment. They're seeing the prospect of a broader war in Europe, the prospect of a nuclear response by Iran or a broader conflict in the Middle East. People see what's happening in relation to Taiwan and exercises. People see what's happened in other parts of the world, but including ours in relation to broader security and law and order issues. It's interesting in this campaign, the number of people unprompted are raising the issue, the concerns about just a general breakdown in law and order in our own country. And I think all of that joined together creates an unsettled mind, and people are concerned because they know the Prime Minister doesn't have a strength of character that some of his predecessors displayed. And I think our adversaries and our friends alike know that the Prime Minister is out of his depth and is weak instinctively in relation to national security matters. And I think that unsettles people, and I can understand why.
I'd just like to develop a little bit more how you as Prime Minister would have handled the issue of the Chinese flotilla. For example, would you have had regular, daily or every second day meetings of the National Security Committee of Cabinet? Would you have reported regularly back to the Australian people? Just give us a sense of how you as Prime Minister would have managed that situation.
Well, Paul, I'll give you an example. When we were in government dealing with an attempted terrorist attack on Australia, we were meeting regularly, daily, sometimes several times a day in relation to issues as they were developing, what our response should be.
Was that in the National Security Committee?
In the National Security Committee, yes. And we had the officials, starting with the Chief of the Defence Force and starting with agency heads otherwise, and there was advice taken, but there was also direction given. And the agency heads, similarly in relation to Operation Sovereign Borders, where we met many times in relation to attempted people smuggling ventures and threats otherwise, it's inconceivable that the government wouldn't be holding regular National Security Committee meetings to hear the advice, but to allow the officials to hear how definite the position was of the government, that we weren't going to acquiesce, that we weren't going to be a silent sort of bystander of whilst there was a breach of our integrity. And that I think is missing in the government's current approach.
Now, under Labor, defence spending is set to increase to 2.3% of GDP, but that's not for about another 9 or 10 years. So to what extent do you feel this is inadequate, and how do you respond to that?
Well, Paul, it's certainly inadequate, and it's not going to reach 2.3%. They won't achieve that figure. Let's be very clear about it. What they've allowed to happen is for AUKUS to cannibalise the three services, and there's obviously been cost blowouts. Now, I think there's significant inefficiency in the way that Defence operates its procurement program. I think we need to have more industrialist capability and capacity in the decision-making processes. I think we have to have truncated decision-making and the ability to invest quickly in projects which are successful and prospective, and terminating of those programs which are likely not to be perspective. And I think that's the first part. So we need to make sure that the money is being spent wisely. And I don't know that we have the skill set there at the moment that's required to give that assurance. So that is a priority, to make sure that we're spending taxpayers' money efficiently. There is further investment that's required, there's no question about that. As Defence Minister, I invested just under $10 billion into the Australian Signals Directorate, which went to the frontline capabilities and the redundancies that we required to keep us safe in a defensive capacity, but also to build up the offensive capacity in cyber. And as we know, the experts advise us that the first salvo, that the first attack on Australian interests will be on our critical infrastructure. So we introduced the legislation, obviously, for systems of national importance, significance, the Socky-Sons legislation at the time, to try and harden our defences against those vulnerabilities that had existed before. So in banking, in water, in sewerage, and in many other parts of essential service delivery. That's an example of where we were able to invest, and invest significantly. And I think we're a safer country because of it today. There has been scant regard for our cyber defences, and this government hasn't made it a priority at all. So my point is that there is more funding required. We've never disputed that, and we have to do so in a responsible way and to make sure that the money is being spent efficiently. Final point is that I think we completely and utterly underestimate in this country the wrecking ball that the Albanese government has been for defence industry. That is our sovereign capability. And when we look at vulnerabilities in the supply chain during the course of COVID, and when we look at what's happening between the United States and China at the moment, we have significant gaping capability gaps, and we should be working as best we can with Australian-owned companies and expertise, some of which already is being exported, to see how we can enhance that. And in part, that was part of our guided weapons enterprise as well. So that really has been a contrast, I think, between what we were able to do in government during my period as Defence Minister and what this government has taken as their approach.
But obviously the quantum is important here, the
Yes.
actual quantum of defence spending. Are you prepared to significantly increase defence spending and go significantly beyond Labor's 2.3%?
Well, as you know, and I know there have been critics of this approach, but we're going to make our announcement in relation to defence in due course. We haven't done it, but we will during the course of this campaign, and it will be a significant investment into defence. We've been very clear about that, and I accept the advice from the experts that the Prime Minister's been listening to. He just hasn't acted on it, and we must be a more resilient country. We must have greater capacity, and we must have greater deterrence capability as well, because the only way that we're going to preserve peace over the course of the next century and to keep stability in our region is if Australia is a reliable and trusted partner, and a partner with capability, and a partner willing to contribute to the overall industrial output or defence capability of our respective partners. The whole idea in my mind of AUKUS was that we would be adding to the output so that the drumbeat could increase because of our partnership. Not that we were some mendicant partner coming to the table cap in hand asking for the nuclear technology to be shared and we had nothing to offer in return. And I think the government's missed that opportunity a bit, but there's work to do in that space as well.
Now, given what you've just said, though, given the strength of that answer, can we therefore assume that you will increase the defence budget as a proportion of GDP significantly on where Labor is?
Paul, we will increase defence spending significantly, but we're not going to make an announcement on it today. We will over the course of this campaign. And Australians have known that the Rudd-Gillard government ran spending in defence down below 2% of GDP. This government's essentially flatlining at 2% now, a little bit under, depending on what happens with GDP. And they're not going to get to 2.3% because they always see defence as a cash cow, and they always see it as an opportunity to fleece and to put money into other areas of their political agenda. So we will have a significant investment into defence, and that's what we did in the Abbott government. We restored respectability to the defence budget. It's what we've done in the Howard years, it's what we've done since that period when we've been in government, and it's what we propose to do if we're elected on the 3rd of May.
Okay, you've said you'll significantly increase on where Labor is. Can we also assume, given the strength of your comments, that while they're taking basically 9 years to get to their declared target of 2.3, that you will have a faster pathway?
Yes. Yes.
So that is a clear commitment.
Yes, because you can't take the advice that the Prime Minister's taking at the moment and then not act. I actually think it's negligent, and I think it's reckless, the approach the Prime Minister's had to defence policy. And it's why people see the Prime Minister as a weak leader, out of his depth, and incapable of making the decisions that are required to keep our country safe.
Okay, now we know that senior officials in the Trump administration have said in relation to Australia that they think we should be going up to 3% of GDP on defence. So what is the way you as Prime Minister would respond to the Trump administration and talk to the Trump administration about those targets?
Well, the advice that I'll take is from the Chief of the Defence Force, the Secretary of the Department of Defence, the central agency, starting with the Prime Minister and Cabinet, and from defence experts otherwise. And as I pointed out earlier, I want greater assurances around the capability acquisition process. And as Defence Minister, it was one of my great frustrations. I was supported by many great people in uniform and in the department, but there is a culture that's crept into defence over decades, to be honest, that I think has led to us not driving value for the dollars that we're investing to the extent that we could. And we need to make sure that we're getting a better yield out of each dollar of taxpayers' money that we invest. So there's opportunity for us to do better with money that we're spending at the moment.
Now, you've said essentially you'll be providing more defence funding than Labor, and you'll be delivering it earlier. Why are you leaving the decision to the final 2 weeks of the campaign?
Dennis, I think it's prudent in terms of getting an understanding of where the bottom line is on the budget and then making an informed decision from there. In opposition, you're subject to government announcements, you're subject to making decisions without the departmental advice, etc. So I think it's prudent. I understand that you can rush out and make a decision and then try and fill in the blanks after as to where the money's coming from. But we have gone through, and again, I've seen some even esteemed journalists write this, but we have been in a policy formulation process for 3 years. One of the things that Tony Abbott instilled in us, and I'd never forgotten, was to make sure that you work on policy from day one. We've had a Shadow Expenditure Review Committee established from day one. Shadows have been required to bring through countless policies through that process. They've been backwards and forwards to the Parliamentary Budget Office in different iterations, and ultimately we will have a better bottom line than the government, and we will always be better economic managers and be more responsible in the expenditure of taxpayer money. So we're dictated to in part by the funding profile and where the budget bottom line is. And it's also not a difficult concept for people to grasp that we're investing more into defence. All of the polling, published and private, shows that the coalition is seen by the public as being streets ahead in relation to management of our defences and keeping us safe. And it won't come as a surprise to people that we're investing more into defence. And we've also spoken about it on countless occasions. Certainly I have, and Andrew Hastie and Philip Thompson and others have, because it's our instinct. Our instinct is to properly fund our defence men and women so that we can keep our country safe in an uncertain time. And we're not proposing to rewrite the whole budget rules, etc. It's not a complicated proposition that we'll be putting, but it will be a contrast to where Labor is. And Labor doesn't have the investment strategy that we see. And I suppose it's worth making this point that, and back to my earlier point about defence industry, I think we have an enormous capacity, as Japan has been able to do in relation to the Americans, to open up $1 trillion industry in our country where we can provide sustainment, servicing, deep cycle maintenance to both the surface and subsurface fleets of the United States and others who are going to spend a lot more time in our region over the course of the coming decades. And that capability exists here if we're prepared to invest in it and if we're prepared to back some unbelievably talented people, predominantly who have left the Australian Defence Force to establish a small or medium-sized enterprise. Many of them have got capital constraints and balance sheet tightness, and maybe there are ways in which we can help them form better relationships with the primes and others. But I think there is a huge missed opportunity for defence industry. I think that is a huge win in Western Australia, in South Australia in particular, but also in Victoria, New South Wales and Queensland.
So in a way you're looking at defence industries to actually fund increased funding for defence.
Well, I think there's a multiplier, an economic multiplier here for us, and there is a capability gap in the American model. They can't keep up with the servicing and with the work that they need to be doing on their ships, and it makes sense that if those ships are spending more time in our part of the world, and as I say, this is what the Japanese have been able to leverage well, then it's going begging at the moment, but there is an opportunity for us to grow defence industry here. The revenues would be significant, and we can provide support to them in the interim. And I think that not only grows our defence base, but also our industrial base as well, because obviously the skills are transferable, and there is an ability for us to, I think, we're a trusted partner now, but to be a trusted partner which significantly contributes to the whole supply chain.
Just switching to economic policy, you'll put a lot of emphasis on fiscal accountability and the need to restrain spending. And this is clearly one of your priorities. But after you've achieved a degree of spending discipline in your first term, would you consider the implementation of permanent cuts in personal income tax?
Paul, I want to see us move as quickly as we can as a country to changes around personal income tax, including indexation, because bracket creep, as we know, is a killer in the economy, and it stifles productivity and entrepreneurialism and hard work, etc. But we need to do it at a time where the budget can afford to do so. And that people ask about my political influences, but that was the Howard model, where we were able to come in. The Howard government never promised taxation reform going into the 96 election. They never promised a revolution around rewriting of the way in which the economy works, and they took that to subsequent elections, and they worked on the tax reform that they were proposing, and they took it to an election to seek a mandate. And they inherited, remember, in the Howard years, which was a horrific figure at the time, but $96 billion worth of debt. They were able to pay that off progressively. They were able to manage the economy, provide the services, and put us in a position which was enviable. Now, if we win the election on the 3rd of May, which I believe we can, we will have to clean up a very significant mess. But what I acknowledge now is, having moved around the country for the last 3 years, is that people are in a very significantly difficult spot at the moment. There are families who are pulling kids out of low fee paying schools, people who aren't insuring their homes or decide to run the risk of not insuring their car because they just haven't got the money in their budget. So there is a need to provide support to people now to help them through this cost of living crisis that the government's created. But importantly, what we've done in relation to particularly two of the major policies that we've announced, they're not a recurrent structural spend in the budget. They are one-off assistance packages, which is exactly the theory that the Howard Costello government had. It's the theory that we applied over the course of COVID, and it means that the government has much more significant structural spends in the budget than what we go into this election with.
So can I just go back to one of the points you just mentioned about personal income tax? You did talk about the idea of indexation of the personal income tax rate scales. So to what extent is that an in principle commitment?
Well, it would be an aspiration of our government to achieve that, because it provides equity in the tax system, and it's costly to do. So some of the figures are well over $10 billion a year in terms of the cost of the budget for that measure. And it's not realistic to be able to commit to that now. But what I would say is that there is a lot of spending in Labor's budget that, as we've pointed out, is the most significant really since the government of Hawke Keating and back to Whitlam before that. This guy is Whitlam-esque, and 3 more years would be a disaster for our economy.
Now, I appreciate the point that you can't commit to it now, and I appreciate the point you've made that spending control is very much the priority. But can I just ask, in terms of your personal view of the economy, your personal view of taxation, how important is it for you, looking at the future as a potential Prime Minister, to say indexation of the rate scale is something you want to achieve?
It's absolutely an aspiration that I have, because I come from a business background, I have a business degree, I've run businesses, and I've been the Assistant Treasurer of this country, and I've studied very closely John Howard and Peter Costello in the Parliament when I was outside of the Parliament. And so lower, simpler, fairer taxes is instinctive for me, and providing reward for effort and allowing people to keep more of their money it's within our DNA. So no question, no hesitation in relation to the desire to make the tax system fairer for those who are working harder and trying to get ahead. And under the Labor government over the last 3 years, people have gone backwards. We've had 7 consecutive quarters of negative economic growth in households here, which has put people back years and years. And there'll be a lot of people, including the 30,000 small businesses which have gone bankrupt over the course of the last 3 years, who will be scarred by that. I remember very intently the discussions around our kitchen table in the 80s and 90s when businesses were going broke, when there were for sale signs on homes, when there were for lease signs on businesses. They just couldn't rent. I came out of school in 1987. It was tough to find a job. And that was the Labor impact. And I think for our generation, particularly given the impact on small business, for those of us who came from small business families, we've never forgotten that. And I fear that we're on the cusp of going into that period now if there is a re-elected Albanese government. And for 30,000 businesses, those kids have sat around their kitchen tables watching their mum and dad who have worked their guts out and have lost everything because of the Albanese government's economic settings.
Well, can I just ask you about spending? Because we know that the budget papers show that under the Labor government we go for 10 years with budget deficits. And this is one of the fundamental aspects of our budgetary situation. Now, clearly, can you give us some sort of indication, some sort of benchmark or aspiration, given that Labor's pointing at deficits for the next 10 years, can you tell us how many years under a coalition government before you can get to surplus?
Well, Paul, what a remarkable set of circumstances where this government was able to achieve a surplus in its first 2 years by coincidence. And then all of a sudden, when they're left by themselves, there are 10 years of red ink as far as the eye could see. It shows how much damage they can do very quickly. We left them a set of figures which in the circumstances were pretty remarkable.
But I mean, can you do better than 10 years?
Well, Paul, again, if you go back to where John Howard was in 95, 96, he wasn't able to predict that the $96 billion would be paid off and that you'd be back into surplus by the year 2004 or whatever the period may have been that he might have had in his own mind at the time, because you can't honestly answer that question in saying, without the finance and without the Treasury and without the PM&C advice, without seeing the spending profiles and the assumptions that are being made, I don't think you can. I don't think it's a reasonable question, to be honest. But what
Well, can I just ask a simple proposition?
Please.
No, sure. But I guess the question is, 10 years is a long time. Without putting a number on it, can you do better than 10 years?
Paul, I think we will always do better than a Labor government when it comes to economic management.
So will you do better than 10 years?
Well, we demonstrated that we could do better than 10 years when we came to government after the Rudd-Gillard wrecking ball, and we did well in getting the budget back to balance, and we did well going into COVID. We saved the economy through JobKeeper and JobSeeker, and we didn't lock in that recurrent spend. It wasn't legislated, or we'd still be making those payments today, which is the same principle that we've taken in relation to our $1,200 tax rebate, giving people back $1,200 of their own money, and the 25 cent a litre fuel excise cut, which provides immediate assistance economy-wide now, which helps families through a difficult period that's been foisted upon them, but also has downward pressure on prices across the economy, which is exactly what's required in what's been an inflationary environment under this government.
Now, obviously, you've got aspirations in all these areas, but it's going to require some savings, some cuts. You've said you won't cut frontline services and so forth. Will you address what is the largest problem facing the government, and that is the NDIS?
Well, Dennis, when we came into opposition, I sat down with the Prime Minister and said that we would be prepared to support the government with sensible changes to make the NDIS sustainable, and the changes that were required to make the aged care system fit for purpose and fiscally responsible, but also providing dignity for people as they got older. We worked for about 12 months in negotiating with the government on aged care, and we supported those changes through the Parliament. In relation to the NDIS, we did the same, sat down with Bill Shorten and the Prime Minister, and we supported changes to that model. That has flattened some of the cost curve in relation to the out years for the NDIS. And I think what it demonstrates is that, as Howard did in opposition, it was a constructive approach. The Labor Party, of course, offered us no such olive branch in opposition, and the changes weren't able to be made to the NDIS. Now, it's a significant area of growth in the budget. It's $48 billion a year. It's growing by at least 8% year on year. I don't want it to be unsustainable, because the objectives of the NDIS are something I support very strongly. But again, where Bill Shorten's advising that there are organised crime groups ripping off money, and I know that some arrests have been made already, so matters before the court I won't comment on, but there's obviously some evidence of money being misappropriated, and I don't think any taxpayer or any NDIS participant would want to see that.
But really the essential problem with NDIS is not the waste and the rorts that Shorten was talking about. It's the fact that it's the classification of who actually qualifies for it and the burgeoning growth of the people who are included.
Well, that goes to the design of the system.
Yes.
And the problem is that the Gillard government at the time was a buyer in distress when they were negotiating with the state governments, and they were hung out to dry. So there's been a cost transfer from the states to the Commonwealth, and we tried to renegotiate some of that when we were in government, and that wasn't successful, as history will record. So I think that the Commonwealth is exposed through Labor Party's design, and we want a system which is going to support people with disabilities, but it has to be sustainable. So the growth is there in the budget. We understand the pressures, and again, it's one of those programs where I think you need to understand from Treasury and Finance their concerns, and whether their concerns have been acted on by the government of the day, perhaps to an extent, but I think again, it's not something you can redesign from opposition.
Is your family a political plus on the campaign trail?
I think so. I think it's actually, I mean, when you're checking in and out of a hotel every night, it's nice to be able to sit down, have a drink before you go to bed, or wake up and have breakfast, or go for a walk together, and it's probably the only normal part of your day that you have, and because you're not getting home, and otherwise you don't see them for a month either. And I've always said I don't understand how people in the Defence Force can be away from their families for so long. I really tip my hat. But for me, being away Monday to Friday and not seeing them for 5 days, that's manageable, but not for 33 days. So it has been a positive, and we've got great kids, and they're very supportive, and Kirilee's joining me today for a few more days as well. So they've got their lives to lead, but it's nice to be able to spend time with them. Thanks, Dennis.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Paul.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.